Okay, chapter 38. Chapter 38. This is a unusual chapter thrown right in there. If you remember, we just, in the last chapter, Joseph got kidnapped by his own family and sent off into exile. And then all of a sudden here at chapter 38, we're going to pick up the story of Judah. And a lot of people would like to understand, why this was thrown in there. Why is it in there? I think when we get through with it, we'll have a little better understanding. He says, and it came to pass, he says, at that time that Judah went down from his brethren. Now, remember they're all at now? Kind of up around towards Syria, up in that area. That's where they're all at. He went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Dulamite, whose name was Hira, and Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite. Whoa, are they supposed to be with Canaanites? No. Whose name was Shua. He says, and he took her and went in unto her. Otherwise, he married her. And she conceived, and she bare a son, and he called his name Now, there's a lot of names in the Bible I wouldn't like to be called, but would be one of them. Okay, here comes Okay, anyway, she conceived again. Now, what's kind of interesting about that, is that a Hebrew name? No. That's a Canaanite name. Maybe I ought to explain something. Why does God not want them to marry into the Canaanites into their family? All right? Because of their spiritual practices. And every time that the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, and there was a few other dog bites and flea bites and mosquito bites, but there was these certain people who had these cultic worship that going on. God didn't want them to marry into the line of Israel because of the fact that for the first 2 years the women were the only ones with the children, and they taught them their ways, and then they had that influence all the way up. And you'll find that throughout the Bible. Every time they end up marrying one of these women, the children end up being just bad because they have the cultic things that are taught unto them. And, of course, when the children are weaned, they're given unto the fathers, and fathers then take them on to teach them other things. But remember, they've already started out with an education into occultic worship. But anyway, she bare him a son, called his name and verse 4 says, and she conceived again, and bare a son, and she called his name Onan. And she yet again conceived, and bare a son, and called his name Shelah. He says, and he was at Chezib, which is, she bore him. Otherwise, they're down in Canaan. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. Now, we better back up a little bit and kind of look at what's happened now in the line of Jacob's children. By this time, we've already gone through that Reuben has erred dramatically by trying to prove that he is taking over the family and went in and slept with one of Jacob's concubines, or wife, one of the handmaids. And Levi and Simeon, I should say Simeon and Levi, that's the order they were born, they've already erred in the fact that they have become known as butcherers. Fact is, you'll find out that Simeon is considered to be the most heathenistic of all the children. He is really rough on the edges. And because they went into Shechem. Remember the story of Shechem and Dinah, the daughter, what happened to her. Okay, so you have those three have disqualified themselves from now being firstborn. And firstborn isn't meaning that it's that they were the first ones born out of the womb. Firstborn is used as a title of who's going to have run the family and have the major double portion of inheritance, and who's going to get to control and say what's going to go on in the family. It's a title. It's a birthright, but it's a title, that firstborn. Jesus, it wasn't, he's given the title firstborn, and that it doesn't mean he's the firstborn, because he wasn't born, he was resurrected. But he's got that title. He's the first one. He's the preeminence. He's the one that gets to double portion. He's also the one that has the authority. So we see that here now Judah is the next in line. And you go, gee, okay, if he messes up, well, we still got 11 more kids to go. I mean, not 11 more, but there was 11 total, so we got some others we could go through. But I want you to take note of something, and this is the book of Merle, chapter 9, verse 12, okay? And this is just the conclusion. But I look at this as I go through the whole Bible, and what God keeps bringing up and has specific focus on is the first 4 children born to the first wife. And that's Reuben, and it's Simeon, and Levi, and Judah. Those are the ones that God specifically places into some sort of in the role that he's doing. Later on, we're going to see Joseph become a type and shadow, and we're going to see that type and shadow will split up and also become a double portion. It will look like that Jacob chooses and gives Joseph the leadership and the double portion. But when we get there, I'll explain a little more about that. But anyway, so Judah's really it's important now. Why do I say this is all important, and why am I making such a point of it? Because Satan was looking at this, and he knows God, and he's making a point out of this. He's already corrupted the first 3. Now he's working on the 4th. Okay? Judah is being led, down there by something, by his flesh and whatever. But anyway, he's got these 3 kids now, and they're born to this Canaanite woman. And in verse 7 it says, "And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him." Interesting way that is put here. Could that mean, well, he just died at a very early age mysteriously? Yeah. And what was his wickedness? We're not told, but more than likely it had something to do with the Canaanite practices. And it did not please God at all. So God transferred off the earth. What do I mean by transfer? Well, because every one of us is a spirit that lives inside of a body and possesses a soul. And when we leave this realm that we're in now, we're going to go to another realm. You don't die. You're going someplace else, and you're going to be there for eternity. Went someplace else, and because I read that God was unhappy with him, more than likely he didn't go to where a good place was. And he's going to live there for a long time. Okay, so you say, well, okay, that's what it says there. The Lord slew him. Okay, in verse 8 it says, "And Judah said unto Onan," he says, "Go into thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise up seed unto thy brother." Later on, this will become a Levitical practice, a Levitical law. But we're a long ways from Moses and the Levitical laws yet. This was a practice of the land. And the reason you have to look at this and say, why was this in effect? Remember that the family was the absolute backbone of humanity and survival at this time. I mean, there was your family had to be strong, or somebody else just wiped you out and took what you had. So children was very, very important. And if you had a woman that was brought into your family as a wife, just because her husband died, she's still childbearing material, and she's already in the family, so that would be then the next brother bring in a child unto her and keep that family line going. It was very important to them. The children were, to raise up children, as many as possible, and I think that's why they also went for the multiple wife thing. But anyway, I just wanted to point out, I don't believe it was sexual drive. Understand? I don't think so at all. I think it had more to do with survival instincts and whatever. But anyway, this was the practice of the land at that time, and it raised up seed unto thy brother. In verse 9 it says, "And Onan knew that the seed should not be his." Otherwise, if he has a child now, and it's through his own wife, then he would be the firstborn now, right? He would have that title because his brother's dead. And his child would then gain all the inheritance. His family line would get everything. But if he goes in unto his brother's wife, widow, and raises up a child, it all belongs to him, to the child of him, the other family line. Do you see how that would be? Well, brotherly love just isn't there. And caring and family and whatever. This is self-centered, whatever. So it says, he came to pass when he went in unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, at least that he should give seed to his brother. He says, there ain't no way I'm going to be obedient and go in and do what I need to do, but at the same time, I'm not going to let her conceive. He says, the thing which he did displeased the Lord, and therefore he slew him also. That's interesting. I'm glad we live in the time of grace. Have you ever done anything you felt might have displeased the Lord a little bit? A little, yes, yeah. So, and he says then in verse 11, said, Judah to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, he says, remain a widow at thy father's house till Shelah, he says, my son be grown. He says, for you said, lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. He has just made a contract. She is now betrothed to Shelah, the younger boy, because he's too young to marry yet. But she's betrothed. There's a contract. That's why, otherwise, if your husband dies, are you not free? According to all the laws and all the everything, if you're free from that when your husband dies, or if the wife dies, then the husband's free. The death do us part. You understand, marriage is for this earth, this realm that we live in now, and when that happens, you are freed from that contract that you have made. So, here, she's got a contract now for this younger boy. It seems a little strange in itself. You make, of course, fathers make contracts all the time for prearranged marriages, for children in the East and whatever. But remember, she's older now. And he's young, and he's probably going, are you kidding me, Dad? But anyway. 12. And in process of time, the daughter of Shelah, says, Judah's wife died. He says, and Judah was comforted and went up into his sheep shearers, and Timnah, he says, where his friend's Hira, the Adullamite, was. Now, when they go up sheep shearing, it's a job. They all get together and they all help each other and they shear the sheep and they get all the wool off and everything. And then it's kind of party time. And they have sheep shearing contests and who can shear and get the most sheep and get the wool off and the most pound. There's all kinds of contests they do and everything. But one of those, I think, is also a drinking contest that they do. But anyway, so it's kind of a big party time. It's kind of like Roundup, I guess, for cattlemen. That's the best I can come up with. Okay, anyway. And it was told Tamar, saying, behold, thy father-in-law goes up unto Timnah to shear his sheep. And she put her widow's garments off from her, and I assume those were probably black veil, black dress, or whatever. And she covered her with a veil and wrapped herself, set in an open place, which is by the way of Timnah, for she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wife. Otherwise, Judah's breaking the contract by doing nothing. And she has no children, and she has no husband, and yet she's betrothed, and yet the father-in-law is not fulfilling the contract. So when she hears that he's going up to shear sheep, she goes and dresses up like one of the temple prostitutes. Now, that's not the godly temple. That's the heathen, temples. That's how they supported their temples, many times was with prostitutes. So anyway, she sits by this roadside. Now, you look at all this and you think, what is God doing here? What is it? What is going on? Well, what God's doing, as he does so often, is God is totally in control of this situation, but what he knows is he knows the flesh of us human beings, and he knows our lusts, and he knows our desires, and he knows our sinful nature we have. And God just uses that. to get done what he wants to get done. And yet, it's our free will. Nobody makes Judah do this. This is Judah's own idea. But God then gets involved. So let's watch it. In 15, it says, when Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot. And he should have just said, oh, shame on her, and went on his way. He says, because she had covered her face. Now here, he didn't recognize it was his daughter-in-law, and he wasn't expecting to see his daughter-in-law. And and what I cannot make excuses for him. 16, and he turned unto her by the way and said, go to, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee. He says, for he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will thou give me if thou mayest come in unto me? Otherwise, let's make a deal here. Let's make a contract. And he said, I will send thee a kid from the flock. Now that doesn't mean a child, that means a goat, or a baby sheep or something, a goat. Okay. A kid from the flock, he says, and she said, wilt thou give me a pledge till thou send it? Otherwise, I want to keep your credit card with your picture on it. I want something that I know that you'll send this goat by, and that just sounds reasonable, and it sounded reasonable to him at the time. Remember, he didn't go out looking for a harlot. He was on his way to shear sheep. He just happened to see one. That's the best excuse I can give him. Okay. 18, and he said, what pledge shall I give thee? And she said, thy signet, thy bracelets, and thy staff that is in thy hand. And he gave it unto her, and came into her, and she conceived by him. Yeah, so she's got all these items that belong to him. It's like having his credit card with his picture on it, because his signet ring, his staff would have his name on it, all this stuff, it belonged to just him. Now, does he think he's okay? Yeah. Nobody will know. I mean, we're on our way, and I'm out of my country, and I'm out of, my hometown, and nobody's going to know, and this is okay. You know what? God knows, doesn't he? And God's got a way of, I've found that it's just easier not to sin, because when you do, God screams it, and then you're in trouble. You know that? You're in sad trouble. 19. And we can just imagine, we'll talk about it more in a minute here. 19, and she arose, and she went away and laid by her veil from her face. Otherwise, she put off her prostitute clothes and put on garments of the widowhood. And Judah sent, he says, the kid, the goat, he says, by the hand of his friend, the Dulamite, and received his pledge back from the woman's hand, but he found her not. And when he asked the men of that place, saying, where is the harlot that was openly in this by the wayside? And they said, there was no harlot in this place. What do you think we are? This is a decent neighborhood, And he returned to Judah, and he said, I cannot find her. And also the men of the place said that there was no harlot in this place. And he's probably thinking, oh my gosh, it was probably one of those guys' wives. No wonder nobody wants to say anything, or whatever. He just kind of said, well, it's a bum deal. But I can get a new staff. And what good is my signet ring to them? They don't know me, and it doesn't make any difference. And anyway, he probably just justified. He went on. Judah said, let her take it to her, lest we be ashamed. We wouldn't want to be ashamed. Oh, no, right. Why did he turn into her? Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her. And it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told Judah, saying, now isn't it interesting? I just always think about this. She conceived. You know what the chances of that happening is? 100% when God's involved. Just think about that. That's something to think about, isn't it? After that, it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Well, she really did. That was a true statement. And also, behold, she is with child by whoredoms. Well, kind of was. All right. And Judah said, bring her forth and let her be burnt. Well, that was the custom of the land there. If somebody was caught in adultery or whatever else, they would stone them and burn them. They'd be burnt. Why? Because we got to get rid of all the evil out of the land. Well, evil we know about. See, he thinks nobody knows about what he did. Yeah. 25. And that always gets me is when you go before a court, you don't. I know you guys wouldn't. But somebody goes before a court, then they found out later the judge is guilty of the same thing, taking bribes and whatever, that's something else. In 25 it says, and then she was brought forth. She sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the men whose these are, I am with child. And she said, discern, I pray thee, who these are, the signet, the bracelet, and the staff. Now, whoever she sent those things to, and with that little message, I'm sure when they saw it, they knew who it belonged to. And they're going, oh my. How is this going to play out? And so here he shows up. Can you just imagine that for that he thought he got away with it? He thought it was just a moment of pleasure that no one would know anything about. And he was lonely. I can't give him any excuses. But anyway, all of a sudden, boom, everybody's going to know about it now. And what are they going to say? My goodness. Well, understand this. This is the type and shadow. He did it. He has to live with it. Mary didn't do it, and she had to live with it for a very long time. And they all accused her of doing it. Isn't that interesting? Kind of gives you a little, when you think about that, she went her whole life saying, Jesus, tell them who you are so that I can be vindicated, free. They all thought she had got in trouble with somebody else. 26. Judah acknowledged them and said, she has been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to Shelah, says my son. And he knew her again no more. She's more righteous than I because I didn't give my son to her? Wait a minute. I'm the one that went in and made the deal with her, and not me, but Judah. Do you see anything here where he's saying, I was at fault going into a prostitute? No, not at all. Typical man, isn't it? Oh, wait a minute. What? I shouldn't say that. But it's true. It is true. Now, did the marriage of Shelah and her ever then come about? The answer is no. She's going to have a child, and it's going to be her only child, and she's never going to be married again to anybody. That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, she's going to end up with a couple kids, all from this one encounter. But it's okay because she now has qualified as a woman who can be, that's thought of okay by the Lord because she had a child. See, that's how important having the children was in those days. That's why being barren was so hard. In 27 it says, it came to pass in the time of travail that behold, twins were in her womb. Not only did she have a child, she had two of them. Okay, twins. Oh, that you notice how when you have a baby, the news goes out. Oh yeah, she's going to have a baby. But when they have twins, everybody talks about it. Well, Judah's going, oh yeah, I probably have quintuplets or something. They really make it known. Okay, but anyway. Twins is enough, was in her womb. It says in verse 28, it says, and it came to pass, he says, when she travailed, that one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this came out first. So, it was very important. Remember, we're talking about title, we're talking about double inheritance, we're talking about running a family, whoever that comes out, who's the firstborn, and this hand came out. It's kind of like the handwriting on the wall. You don't see the rest of it. It's just a hand. But she ties a scarlet thread around that hand, And then, Lord, you think this child's going to get born. Well, if you know anything about getting born, hand first is not a good way to get born, okay? So, this could be a difficult situation. But all of a sudden, the hand goes back in, and Lord, here comes something else. And it came to pass as he drew back his hand that behold, his brother came out, and she said, how has this broken forth? His brother pulled his hand back in, shoved him out of the way, and came forth first. this breach be upon thee. Therefore his name was called Perez. Perez said, no, I'm going out first. You know? He says, and afterward, I mean, they're already sibling fighting. You know, and they haven't even got born yet. And afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zara. Now, which one's firstborn? Perez. But Zara got ripped off. Man, you could just hear him his whole life. I should have had it. I was first coming out. It was a dirty trick you did. Pulled me back and came forth. I mean, I should have been mine. Should have been mine. But okay, now you say, why was that in here? Why is that in here? Well, of course, we know that it's going to be in the line of Judah, that Jesus is going to be born out of that line. So it's very, very important. But why is it thrown in the middle of Joseph? See? Yeah, when this is all coming about here, what we're going to see now is that this is the line that's showing us the line that Jesus is going to come out of, and now we're immediately going to go over Joseph, the part of Joseph being kidnapped by his brothers and thrown into a pit and then taken out, probably 3 days later, and there's some things that makes it think that maybe he was in that pit for 3 days. But anyway, he was sold off to the Ishmaelites. Stop that story right there on Joseph and start a new one now, typing and shadowing what is going to be in the line of Judah. And you're going to, from this point forward, everything that we read about Joseph is a type and shadow of Jesus Christ. Everything. It's this break here is because in the Hebrew, remember, a lot of times like they make an overall statement and then it goes back and gives you the details. Like in Genesis, it gives you God created the heavens and the earth, then it goes back and gives you the details of it. God created man and woman, then it goes back and gives you the details of it. Well, in this case here, God's got a line going that's going to be the seed of woman that's going to crush the head of the serpent. Now he's going to go back and give us a picture of that person in the story, the life of Joseph. Very, very interesting. We're going to see type and shadow. I'm not going to bore you with all the types and shadows that go through this because we would never get through it in the time allotted. But understand this. There's over 100 types and shadows in the story coming up. That's absolutely so clear that even I can see them. Okay. Chapter 39. 3:9. Chapter 39. And Joseph, we're back to Joseph again, was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him into the hands of the Ishmaelites, bought him from the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. Okay, so here we got Joseph, and he's brought down, and he's sold into the hands of Potiphar. Jesus, who's in heaven, ruling and reigning, and free because he's God, and he's, comes and goes off to, all of a sudden he's born through a woman, couldn't bring his throne, couldn't bring his angels with him, couldn't bring anything with him whatsoever, and he's sold into humanity. And now he's captured into humanity. He became flesh. Isn't this interesting? First, type and shadow. It says, and the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house. All that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass from that time that he made him overseer of his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. Isn't that interesting? I don't have the time to really show and tell you all these things, but there's so much. Even the time when Jesus was born into the earth, our magnetic field of the earth is measurable, and they can go back and measure it through the magnetic rocks and all the stuff and everything else. And the magnetic field of the earth got so weak just before Jesus came into the earth that it literally was hard for women to conceive. You need the magnetic field for birth and for life and the whole thing. When Jesus entered in, there's a huge spike in the magnetic field of the earth. Because he came in, things were somewhat restored back into what needed to be for life. It's just like when when Joseph went to Potiphar's house was blessed. When Jesus came to the earth now is blessed. You know, can you think more of a blessing that this earth has ever received from God than his Son coming to die for our sins? I mean, just think about that. Wow. Again, type and shadow. 6. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, he said, save the bread that he ate. Now, that's pretty important, too, because this guy, Potiphar, he's the head man over the executioners, you know. So he's a real important guy. And Joseph was a godly person, it says, and well-favored. Well, remember, his mom was a looker, okay, you know what I mean? So he probably was a handsome young man. How old was he when he was sold into slavery? 17. That's exactly right. We got that back there. It's important to know that because it's going to be 13 years from that time before he's actually brought even out of prison and out of slavery. So it's an interesting thing. 7, he says, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. The sexual part of man is God gave us in order to replenish the earth, it says. And there was a drive there, and a marriage was given in a proper sequence of the way things are to go, and God says yes. But Satan has pulled all of that out of a line, and over 50% of all the things that are bought and sold and led and done and everything on this earth has to do with somehow or other with some sort of sex or sexual drive. Everything on this earth is driven out of sequence like that. So when you see that this is happening here, it's not surprising to me. Satan knows the weakness of man. We're going to be plagued with this until we leave this earth. That's just the way it is. It's everything. Satan uses everything he can, and he finds out what you like, what is important to us, and he explodes that into something that was never intended to be. So anyway, here all of a sudden, Potiphar's wife, she lays her eyes upon him, because why? He's good looking. And I would imagine nobody's ever said no to her, right? Husband's of somebody, she's the head of a, you know what I mean, and very wealthy and whatever, a lot of servants and whatever. She probably had her way with everything. In verse 8 it says, but he refused, and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master, he says, will not what is with me in the house. Otherwise, he doesn't have any idea what's with me in the house. He has committed all things that he has into my hand. He trusts me with everything he's got. There is none greater in this house than I, neither has he kept back anything from me but you, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against him? That's not what it says. How can I do this great witness and sin against God? Bottom line, what is Joseph always looking to? God. Interesting. Another type and shadow of Jesus, isn't it? Everything it's always, is this pleasing to the Father? Is this pleasing to the Father? I always please the Father. The Father spoke out of heaven and said, this is my Son who I'm well pleased with. He always pleases me. 10, and it came to pass as she spoke to Joseph day by day. Can you just see that? Day by day by day. Why doesn't Joseph just leave? He's a slave. He can't just leave. All right? He says that he hearkened not unto her to lie with her or to be with her. Now, surely this temptation wouldn't go on day after day. Couldn't God, don't you think Joseph prayed about this? Lord, can't you do something with this woman? You know, alligator, something, you know, do something. But day after day after day. Isn't it interesting how that temptations are always there. And sometimes it just drags on and on and on. I once asked a man, I said, this guy was very old. He'd been a missionary for 100 years, I think. And I asked him, I said, Bill, do you ever get to the place where you just stop committing sins? Where you just, because you're old. And he goes, yeah, there is. He says, but then you can start working on that list of sins of omission that you didn't do, you should have done. I said, thanks, Bill. 11. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, an outer garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. Otherwise, he picked up his feet and ran, And that's what we should do when we're tempted like that or pulled in. 13, and it came to pass, when she saw that she had left his garment in his hand, and he fled forth, she called unto the men of the house, and she spoke unto them, saying, he has brought this Hebrew. Isn't that interesting? Brought this Hebrew. Not just brought this man. Now, if you're going to go after somebody, what's the best way to go after them? Because of their religion? Hebrew into me, to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice, oh, help, help. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until her lord, her husband, had come home. And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, the Hebrew servant which thou brought unto us came in to me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and I cried, that he left his garment with me and he fled out. Now, I already told you, this guy is in charge of the executioners, right? What would he do if somebody did that to his wife? He'd have him killed. It would be he's used to having people killed. And he's in charge of the executioners. He would have just said, do it. This guy's out of here. But because he doesn't do it, you think maybe he knows his wife a little bit more than she would like him to know her? And it came to pass, he says, when his master heard these words of his wife, that she spoke unto him, saying, after this manner did this servant to me, he says, that his wrath was kindled. Yeah, he was mad. I wonder who he's mad at. Because now he's going to lose the best servant he ever had. But he's got to do something, because he's got to save face. All right? Did Jesus have false witnesses against him? Oh, yeah. You know why he had false witnesses? Because in all of the country, from all of the years, not one person could be found that could bring one accusation against him. Isn't that interesting? We could run him for president. Isn't it interesting? Do you know of any man that you could do that with? No. And Joseph's master, verse 20, took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. So he didn't have him killed. He put him in the prison. Now he must have spoke to the warden of the prison. I want you to put this man in here, but, he's a good man. He must have had a good word for Joseph to the warden. Otherwise, you see, this is the king's prison. Why would you put a Hebrew slave in the king's prison? He would go to the commoner's prison, the dungeon. This is the king's prison. Totally, these are royalty men. This is what we would call a white collar play yards that we have for our white collar crime people. It's different than the big house. All right. 21, it says, but the Lord was with Joseph, and he showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Isn't that interesting? Lord, I appreciate this, but could you just get me out of here? Yeah. He says, and the keeper of the prison. Why does the Lord want Joseph in prison? Safe. I love that. Keeps him out of trouble. Why does he want the people to be down in Egypt for 400 and some years? To be safe. Why? Because they're with people that couldn't stand him, wouldn't marry into him, and wouldn't marry out of him. You know what I mean? It just kept them single. God has a way of doing things. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did, he says he was the doer of it. Now, think about it for a moment. These are all white-collar men. This is the king's prison, and here's a Hebrew slave in charge. Isn't that interesting? I think that's really interesting. Okay, but understand this. We are Christians. You know what? We should be so honest and so willing to do our job better than anybody else because we're doing it as unto the Lord and serving the Lord, that every good business owner ought to see that and raise you up and put you in charge of his business. Well, the problem of it is some of us are kind of slackers at times, aren't we? Joseph was not. The keeper of the prison, verse 23, looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, and the Lord made it to prosper. Gee, thanks, Lord. You're prospering Potiphar. You're prospering the prison warden. What about me? Do you realize how the Lord is prospering this world because we're still here? Understand it. You know, God's mad. Have you ever figured that out? God, matter of fact, he's so mad, but God holds it well. He puts his wrath in bowls and puts them in his temple and locks them up. Why? Because otherwise, there wouldn't be anybody left on this earth. But as soon as we're gone, what's he going to do with them? Get them out and pour them down here. God's mad at sin, at what it caused his son to go through. You gotta get that, you know. Man, Joseph's in here. Everybody he's around is getting blessed because of him, but he's still the slave and he's still in prison. And did he deserve any of this? No, he didn't. I'm going to. Verse 1 of chapter 40. And it came to pass after these things that the butler, you see, that's the high official, white-collar guy, king of the Egypt, and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. You don't want to offend your boss, not especially when he's Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh was wroth against the two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers, and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in a ward in the house of the captain of the guard, under the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. He says, and the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. Otherwise, the Pharaoh put him there because he thought there was something going on until it's found out he's going to keep them both in prison. So they're kind of like under house arrest in prison because now Joseph is serving them. They haven't been found, they haven't really been found guilty yet. Now, you say, well, that's kind of harsh. You're in jail the whole time. They couldn't bond out or anything else. Oh, it's not like the Romans. The Romans scourged you to find out the truth. They just asked you one question after each stroke. I like this better, okay? 5, and they dreamed a dream. Here we go, dreaming the dreams again. Both of them, each man his dream in one night. Each man according to the interpretation of his dream. The butler, the baker, the king of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. Now, let me ask you this question, just to refresh your memory. How many dreams have Joseph had already? 2. Interesting. How many dreams have we got involved here? 2. When we finally get out of here and we get with the Pharaoh, how many dreams is he going to have? 2. Isn't that interesting? Joseph knew they were the Lord. Why? Because it was 2. You must have 2 witnesses. 2 witnesses. If you get a dream and it's just a dream, if there isn't a second witness that comes along, just put it on the shelf. If you get a second dream and it adds up to be the same, or somebody else comes along and tells you the same thing, then you better take note, because it might be the Lord. It probably is the Lord. Okay? 2 at a time, not just one. One won't get it. One's called pizza dream. And Joseph came into them, he says, in the morning, he looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. Yeah, they're in prison. Okay. Made them sad, right? And he asked Pharaoh's officers, he says, that were with him in the ward of the Lord's house, he says, saying, wherefore look you so sad today? Otherwise, why are you down? He says, and they said unto him, we've dreamed a dream. Yeah, okay. Why does that make you sad? And there's no interpreter of it. Oh, they had dreams, and they knew that it was a special kind of dream, but yet no one could interpret it. And Joseph said unto them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me then, I pray you. That's interesting because, later on there's going to be another kid that's going to get dreams, and he's going to be an interpreter of dreams. Isn't that interesting? I'm sure that when Daniel finally, when he's called upon him, he probably heard the story of Joseph many times over. How that Joseph was given dreams, and he knows that what was said was what? That is not God the interpreter of dreams? All dreams belong to God. Daniel knew that already. So when you get to Daniel, you'll have a little insight on why he's so confident in the fact that the Lord knows dreams. Okay? And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said it to him, in my dream, behold, a vine was before me. And he says, in the vine, there were 3 branches. 3? Okay. And it was as the thing budded, he says, and their blossoms shot forth, and the clusters therefore brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and I pressed them into Pharaoh's cup. I hope his hands were washed. And I gave the cup unto Pharaoh's hand. He says, and Joseph said unto him, this is the interpretation of that. He says the 3 branches are 3 days. Now, anybody could probably come up with that. And within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner when thou was his butler. Oh, you're going to put it in and give it back. Yeah, so you're going to be back in a job. You're going to get your job back. You're going to get out of here in just 3 days. Hey, that sounds good. I'm sure he started feeling real good. Probably then the baker said, hey, I had a dream too. Let's get on this bandwagon and go, right? 14, he says, but think on me, he says, when it shall be well with thee. Now remember, he's telling this to the butler. And show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. Oh, sure, kid, sure. Isn't it funny when somebody does something real good for us, and but right away we just kind of like, sure, kid, I'll remember. For indeed, he tells him, Joseph is telling him, I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews. Like the butler's thinking, like I could care less. Why are you bothering me with this story? And there is also I've done nothing that they should put me into this dungeon. I've been around enough people in jail, being a police officer, that I'm going to tell you, they're all innocent. It was somebody else's fault. Or they wouldn't be here if the car would have just started. Something. Okay, when the chief baker saw, verse 16, the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. He says, in the utmost basket there was of all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh. He says, and the birds did eat out of them the basket off my head. And he says, and Joseph answered and said, but before I tell you that, I'll tell you what there was really, and the bakery wasn't in where the king's at. The ovens and the hot stuff and everything else. So it would have been somewhere else, and it probably was a custom they carried, and that's how they carried things, was on their head, baskets full of all this stuff. And birds in Egypt were sacred. So if the birds came down, they couldn't even shoo them away because they were sacred, just like cows in India. Okay? And so, this would be a common thing. And he's thinking, and the birds came down, it was eating on this stuff, and I took it in. He says, and then verse 18, Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. And he's going, oh, all right, 3 days. And within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee. Wait a minute, what? The other guy, you said he's going to lift him up. Yeah, well, he's going to lift your head up. Only your head, though. And shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. Because that's what they did then. That was capital punishment. They would sever the head off, and they would hang him on a tree, crucify the body, and leave him to rot, and the birds would eat him. That's bad guys. Okay? So that's a common practice of Egypt at that time. In 20 it says, and it came to pass on the third day again, which was Pharaoh's birthday. Oh, and they had a practice, they found out through the records and everything else, that the pharaohs on their birthday would release prisoners, would think about it and release prisoners. It was just a common practice. And you say, well, gosh, wait a minute. Look clear down into when you have Jesus down there, and right away it was on a common day, and Pilate says, oh, wait, on this day here, we always release some prisoners. See, that's how they look good to people. That's how they got to be, it must have been just before election time or something. I don't know. Anyway, it was his birthday. Then he made a feast unto all the servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker, he says, among his servants. Otherwise, he says, hey, you got these guys in jail. Let's figure this all out. We're having a big, what do you know about them? Was the butler okay? Was the baker okay? Or were they really kind of bad? Were they doing some stuff? Well, the servants started talking. And I'm sure they give a good report on the butler, and they must have give a bad report on the baker. In 21, he says, and restored the chief butler into his butlership again. He says, and he gave the cup unto Pharaoh's hand. He says, but he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. And yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. Wow. Isn't that something? How many people did Jesus heal? Town after town, everyone who was demon-possessed and sick, it says in many towns he healed every one of them. Let's just give a number. Just throw it out. 300,000? Maybe more. Yet the day he was brought out by Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, behold, the man, I find no fault in him. How many people are out there going, let him go! Let him go! He's a good man. Not a one. Isn't that interesting? The butler forgot him, though he'd done good to him. Isn't that interesting? Okay, chapter 41, next week. Yeah, I wish I could go on with this. I love this story of Joseph. I just love it, because I'm skipping over many types and shadows, many things, but we'll pull some more out as we go. We better pray. Father, we thank you for tonight. We thank you for the time that you have given us in your word, Lord. We thank you for the writing of this word. We thank you, God, for how that you give us a picture book to look ahead and to be able to see and understand even more fully the ministry that Jesus had on this earth. Father, we thank you for all the writings, Lord. 66 books, 40 men, and yet, God, it's obvious. You wrote through every one of them. It's just an integrated message from you. We praise you and thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.